This is Scott with ClaySys. What I'll be showing you today is how to use the ClaySys AppForms Integrated Development Environment, or IDE, to create your custom app forms. Once you have the ClaySys product deployed to your SharePoint farm, you can launch the IDE by clicking on the gear icon in the upper right corner of your SharePoint page, and from the menu choosing AppForms. This launches the IDE. On the left-hand side of the IDE, you will see there are various admin type of features that are available to you. For the demonstration today, though, we'll be concentrating on Forms Explorer. This is the default view that you get when you launch the IDE. Along the top of this window are some buttons: New Folder, New Form, View History, and Manage Security. As you can see, I have no forms or folders created as of yet, so again, for this demonstration, we'll be focusing on New Form and New Folder. Before you can create a new form, you do have to create a new folder. Now, we do this for a number of reasons, one of which is simply for organization. Let's say that you need to create a solution for your HR department. In that case, you may just want to create a folder called HR, and then all the forms that you need for that particular solution can be stored in that one single HR folder. Same is true, maybe you have another solution you need for your finance department. You could create a separate folder for finance and then store all of the forms that you need for that solution in the finance folder. So let's get started. I'll start with a new folder, simply called Demo for today. And now once inside that demo, I'll click on New Form to be able to start creating my form. This actually launches the AppForms Designer. Let's take a look at that. Now, before I get started creating a sample form for this demonstration, there's a number of designer features I'd like to show you. So I'll do that from left to right, and starting on the very left, you will see the designer is actually divided into three different sections: Toolbox, Datasources, and Rules Panel. Now, by default, when you launch the designer, you are in the Toolbox section, and the Toolbox section contains all the controls that you can add to your form. There are 6 different categories in the Toolbox, and if you simply select a category, you'll have the various controls underneath that you can then drag and drop to your form. The Data Sources section, this is where you will be adding receive and submit type of data connections for your form. And then finally, the Rules panel, this is where you add business logic to your form. Now, rules consist of triggers, actions, and decisions. Triggers are simply what causes the rule to execute. So does that happen when you click a button? Or does it happen when you change a value in a text box? That's what's considered a trigger. What has to occur for that rule to run? Actions, these are what logic you're executing in the rule. So are you setting a field's value to a new value? Are you evaluating an expression someplace? Are you hiding a control? That's the action that's going to occur when the rule runs. And then finally, decisions, these are also referred to as conditions. So is there some decision that has to be met or a condition that has to be met before this rule gets executed? So rules consist of triggers, actions, and decisions, and then all the rules combined make up the business logic of your form. Okay, continuing on to the right, the grid area. This is actually the form designer. This is where you add controls, add color, do your layout. This is how you make that form layout and design the way that you want. Above the grid are some options. Lock column, I'll come back to that in a few moments. Let's look at the icons here on the right. The first icon, the shield, this allows you to apply AppForms specific security to your form. This is separate than SharePoint security. This is something specific to AppForms. The next 4 icons allow you to easily insert rows and columns into the grid. So simply select a cell, choose one of these options, or you can right-click on a cell and choose Insert Rows and Columns here as well. Finally, the last icon, the trash can, this allows you to easily delete whatever control you have selected. And like with inserting rows and columns, you can right-click on a control and choose Delete Control here as well. Finally, on the far right, this is the Properties panel. This will show you all of the available properties for whichever object you have selected. So if you have a label selected, you'll have a set of properties specific to a label. If you switch over to a text box, you will have a different set of properties showing here that are specific to a text box. Now, since we have no controls on this form yet, what we're looking at here are the properties of the form itself. So let's take a look at a few of those. By default, when you create a new form using AppForms Designer, the name of that form is New Form. So you do want to change this. So for this demo, we'll call this FRM Demo or Form Demo. The title, you can change that if you'd like as well. You can also set a specific width and height for your form. You can add a background color and then set the gradient of that color. If you prefer, you can add an image to your form as the background, and then once the image is there, you can set the opacity of that image. Enable a close button. This is the X in the upper right-hand corner of a form. Do you want that X to show? Maybe you have logic built into your form such that in order to close the form, you want that user to click a button because you have a rule or something that's going to execute when they click that button. And if they were to click the X in the upper right-hand corner, that logic would not be executed. So this allows you to determine whether or not you want that X to show in your form. Is pop-up. This is also referred to as dialog. Do you want your form to open up as a pop-up or a dialog type of form, or simply open up in the entire SharePoint page? That's what that option is used for. Finally, selected cell style. As I discuss this a little bit, I'm going to do this in conjunction with the lock column up here that I mentioned a few moments ago. So selected cell style, let's look at that. This is the properties that you can set on each individual cell. So I can set the height and then the column span. So column span, what are we talking about? You can see that each time I select a cell, it spans one column. Right? What if I wanted that cell to span 3 columns? Or what if I wanted to put, say, a label in here and make that label wider to act like a title for my form? Well, here's what happens. If I were to, let's say, put a label here, let's go ahead and do that. And now I want that label to be wider because I want it to be like a title area for my form. As I make that wider, look at what I'm doing. I am making every cell in that column just the same width. And I'm also affecting then, of course, all of the columns to the right. Well, maybe that's not what you want to have happen when you do this. So how do you change that behavior? What you can do is you can select a cell, come down here and say, I want that cell now to span 3 columns. Now, as you can see, that one cell does span 3 columns. So now if I put that label in that cell, I can now make that label that wide, but I'm not affecting any other cells above or below. That's the cool feature of column span. But what if I wanted to make individual cells completely different widths? How do I do that? Because again, if I go and drag this particular handle left, I can make it smaller, but I'm making every cell in that column the same width. How can I make that dynamic? That's where unchecking the lock column option comes into play. So let me show you that. Let's uncheck lock column. And you will get a warning about this. I'll click OK to that for now. But now you can see my handles at the top went away. But what I can do is I can select a cell, and now if I look at these properties, you'll see now that I have a width property, which I did not have before. So I can change that width from, let's say, 150 to 50, and now I've just affected the width of that one cell. So whether or not you use lock columns is totally up to you and the design that you're trying to achieve. So for this particular demonstration, I'll set this back. I will do the lock columns. Because what I want to talk about now is laying out a label control for my form that will act as the title control. So let's change this now back to a column span of 3. Let's put a label in here again, and I'll make that wider. And now what I want to show you, if you recall back, I mentioned the properties panel displays whatever is the currently selected object. Well, now that I have a label selected, you can see the properties panel is now showing me the properties for a label. So let's take a look at some of those. The default value. This is nothing more than what text is going to show in that label. So we'll change that. And then let's look at some of the style properties we can set. We can change the, for instance, the text alignment from left to center. Let's go ahead and change the height as well. Make this 50 pixels, make it a little bit bigger. Change the font size to be proportional to that, make that 28. Let's change the font color to white. Now obviously with a white background that'll disappear here for a moment. But what I can do is come down here to back color. I'll select some shade of blue, and there's the text that I have back. By default, every control will be set to visible, so I'll leave that. And let's also make the text bold and italic. So as you can see, it's really quite simple to drag and drop controls and then use the property panel to modify various properties of each control you have. Okay, let's go ahead and get started on adding the rest of the controls that we need for our demo form. Now our sample form today is simply going to be collecting first name, last name, address, city, state, and zip. So let's go ahead and add those controls. I'll make that just a little bit narrower. So I'll go ahead and add label controls for first name. There's last. That will be for address, and then we'll use just one label for city, state, and zip. And now let's go ahead and add in the text box controls to collect the data. So there's one for first name, one for last. Now before I add the one for address, as you can imagine, clicking into that cell, an address would probably be wider than what is the width of that cell. And again, recalling back to what we talked about before with having a locked column, I could widen this particular column, but it widens it for all the cells. So I'm going to do the same thing here that I did for the label. Select that, go to selected cell style, make that column span 3, and now I can add my text box to there and make it wide enough to hold an address field, or an address entry I should say. And then finally we'll put in the text boxes for city, state, and zip. Now, another feature of the designer I want to show you is when you select a control, what you will see happen here is a property dialog will automatically appear. What this is showing you is a subset of the properties, really what amounts to be the most popular properties of the control type that you have selected. Now, this is configurable in that it can be turned on or off. So it is turned on by default. To turn it off, it's simply an option in the admin panel here in the designer. So we'll go ahead and use this to change our label names, or I'm sorry, not the names of labels, but the text that's shown. One label for city, state, and zip. Now you'll see, just like I have a control name here, most of the time when you have names for your text boxes, you want them to kind of be specific or have a certain type of naming convention. So to give you an idea here, we can select text box, and I can go up here and don't set a default value in this case, but I can change the name here as well. So I won't change all those text boxes, but you can see it's really quite simple to use the property dialog to change some of the most popular properties of the controls. Now, the next thing I want to show you is adding a very basic rule. So for this part of the demonstration, let's make an assumption that in text box 21, when I enter the name Los Angeles, what I want to have happen is in text box 22, I want that to automatically show California. So to do that, show you a couple of different things. We'll flip back over here on the left to Rules panel. You can see that text box 21 is still selected, so if I choose to create a new rule, you can see the trigger now is on value change of text box 21. That's the action. So when I type in something in text box 21 and move off that field, that causes the value to be changed. That's our trigger for this particular rule. Now, remember we wanted to put a condition on this. So let's add a condition. And we're going to say when text box 21's value, and you can click the down arrow here, and this adds that particular part of it to this section here. Right? So you'll see that in a second. I'll click that. So when text box 21's value is equal to, and here we can type in Los Angeles. Let's verify that condition. That's good. We have a green box. If it was wrong, you would see a red box. Okay, so there's our decision. When text box 21 value is equal to Los Angeles, now we can click plus to add an action what we want to have happen is set text box 22 value equal to California. Again, let's verify that. Okay, we're good. Done. So now let's take a look at that in total. So we have text box 21. If that value is equal to Los Angeles, set text box 22 to California. So up here on the very top, you'll notice there's a preview form button. It allows you to take a look at your form, do some tests to make sure it's working right. So we'll click on preview. And the first thing I'll type into the city here is, let's say, Boston, and tab off, and nothing happened over here in state. If I come back here and say Los Angeles and tab off, there you can see it was automatically set to California. So that's the type of business logic you can easily add to your form using the rules panel here. But this is not representative of what the rule actually looks like. I mean, you can see that there's a decision, and then below the decision is an action, which you can also do at the top here next to the Designer tab is a Rule tab. If we select that, now you can see an actual visual representation of what that rule looks like. Now on the left-hand side, you can see that that was called New Rule. We can change that name in either location. You can see it's attached to the text box 21. That's the trigger. And again, that's going to be on a value change. And over here, here's our condition. If it's equal to Los Angeles, then we're going to run this action called set that value of text box 22 to California. So very quick and easy overview of rules, but very simple to add rules and business logic to your form. Okay, so let's assume now that we have the logic built in the way we want, we have it designed the way that we want. How do we get this form now into our SharePoint page so that we can use it on SharePoint? Let's take a look at that. So the first thing that we have to do before we can use our form in a SharePoint page is to obviously save the changes that we've made. So here in the upper left corner, there's a button that's called Save Form. And what this button does is save the changes to the form and then save the form back to our folder that we had created called Demo. So let's go ahead and click that first. Once it's saved, you'll get a quick notification, and now you're ready to proceed to the next step. Now before we do that though, I want to take a moment and show you another feature of the Designer. And here above the Save Form button, there's a drop-down box that right now just shows our demo folder. But imagine, if you will, for a moment, if I had created other projects, meaning other folders in the AppForms IDE, this drop-down box would show me those other folders. And once I selected a different folder, then to the right there is another drop-down, and this shows you all of the forms that are in that folder that you've selected. So if we take this a step further, imagine I had some other forms in our demo project. This drop-down would show me those forms. I could select one of the other forms. The Designer would switch to that new form, and I could continue working in that new form now without ever having to go back to the IDE. So it's a very nice feature of the Designer. Okay, so now that we have the form saved, the next step to use our form in a SharePoint page is to check in the form, and we do that there using the Check In Form button. So I'll click that. Now when this happens, a dialog box will appear. This allows you to add any comments that you might like about the current design that you've made. So once you're ready with those, you can click OK. The check-in process will now complete, and now as you can see, your form in the Designer is read-only. So in other words, you cannot make any more design changes at the moment and save those. If you need to do that, you will have to go and check out the form. All right, we've saved it, we've checked it in. Now, how do we use this in the SharePoint page? We need to get back to our site. And once again, the Designer helps out there as well. In the very upper left corner, there is a link that'll take you back to the site from where you came from. So we'll click on that. We're back at our site. I'll go to Site Contents and Site Pages. And you can see here that I have a sample page called Demo Page. This is a standard SharePoint site page. No customization done whatsoever. So I will edit that. And like any SharePoint site page, there is an area to add a web part. So here I'll go Insert, Web Part. Now this is the new part of the process that you have when you enable the ClaySys AppForms feature in your site collection. A category on the left, there's one now called ClaySys, and when you select that, there is an HTML web part now that we have to be able to display your form in a SharePoint page. So I'll click the Add button to add that web part. And I will now click on the Edit the Web part. We have to save it first. Once that's done, the Properties panel comes up here on the right, like any other web part, and we have a Configure button on the ClaySys AppForms web part. This allows us to pick the form that we want to show in this particular web part on our SharePoint page. So I'll select Form Demo. There are other properties here you can set, just like any other web part, but for this demo, I'm going to leave those be the default, and click OK. And now I'll go ahead and save this page. And you are now done. This form can now be used in this SharePoint page to start collecting data. So as you can see, it's really quite simple to use the ClaySys AppForms IDE to create an organizational structure of all your projects, your folders, create forms within those folders, design it, lay it out the way you need, add your business logic, save it, check it in, and then add it via a web part to your SharePoint page. I hope that you found this video to be beneficial. We're going to be producing more of these types of videos in the coming weeks and months, so be sure to visit our site often for updates. You can find our videos at www.claysys.com/pages/viewdemo.aspx. If there is a how-to video that you would like to see that is not currently on our site, please let us know using the feedback email below, info@claysys.com, and we will do our best to create this for you. Again, I hope you found this to be of benefit, and thank you for using ClaySys AppForms.